as I've done various videos, I've talked about things being musically right. And my wife Debbie asked me to take a time to explain what I'm saying because it's a very broad and loose term. So I'm going to do that tonight. And um, I certainly don't want to turn you into an audiophile. That's the furthest thing from my imagination because a lot of times you're instructed to listen for this or listen for that. Is there more bass, less bass, more treble? Oh, it doesn't sound like this and it doesn't sound like that. And, you know, that sort of approach that a lot of audiophiles use is chasing what I call the non-verifiables. Because you don't know what you should be hearing from the recording itself. Years ago, I think it was test disc number 2 from Stereophile. Gordon Holt did a really lovely start to the disc where he spoke one sentence at a time into a microphone. And each time he sounded very different. And then at the end, he said, it was track this that really sounds like me. And, you know, you don't very often get what I call the verifiables. Miles Davis was known for throwing people off the recording set because they didn't know how to mic stuff. He threw off a second in one recording, and then the recording engineer came out to set it up, and he threw them off too. And so, you know, even the choice of microphones can dramatically affect the tonality of anything. And if you've seen a recording studio, you know, there's more than just, you know, right and left channel and faders. They're also have the potential for EQing things as they see fit. Keep in mind that a lot of recordings, in fact, are done with one musician at a time. Usually in rock and roll, they usually start with the drummer or the bass player, and it's multi-track. So the one guy does his licks, and then they call the next guy. He's got a set of, you know, headphones on or whatever, or listening to the studio monitors, and he performs to that recorded track. So even the fiction of a stereo image is just that. It's something created by the recording engineer that in reality it never existed. There are some recordings that are properly done that give you that, but you know, if you're going to listen to a recording and say, oh, it should sound like he's over here and he belongs 5 feet back over there, you know, I'm sorry, but, you know, I have to say it, that's just utter bullshit. It's not real. I once had a customer come in and listen to a track, and he told me everything that was entirely wrong with the presentation. Now, the recording was done by Patrick O'Hearn. And Patrick O'Hearn was very talented in doing electronic recordings, and it was all done on a Macintosh computer. So I never saw the depth button on my keyboard, or right or left. I mean, I was kind of fascinated, but that's the sort of rubbish that runs around out there. So you don't know how much bass there should be, how much treble there should be. Oftentimes, whether someone should sound to the right or to the left, 10 feet back, you know, in your face. Those are non-verifiables. So when I talk about what's musical, I particularly listen for 3 things. And honestly, it's the very same thing you do when you're out listening to live musicians. My favorite question to everybody is, when's the last time you heard a good band at a wedding reception? And most people chuckle at that because most of them are actually fairly miserable. And they play extraordinarily loud, which makes it even worse. And you don't find everybody back by the bar 30 feet away saying, oh God, they sound really good back here. I wish I could sit down. No, they sound terrible everywhere. And your first thought isn't, oh, gee, if they turned up the drummer or they turned up the bass. No, your first thought is, God, these guys really need to practice to learn how to play music. So the first thing I listen for is rhythm. Does it sound like I'm actually listening to quality musicians? And if they're on a recording label, somebody's taking the time to pay these guys under contract, trust me, they're usually really good musicians. And the only thing a recording can do is capture as best they can, but a system can screw that up and can screw it up miserably. And to be honest, 9 out of 10 systems that I listen to, that doesn't even play things in time. Just pull out a piece of sheet music, put a ruler to it, and by God, the notes line up vertically. That's called time. So that's one of the first things I listen for is, am I listening to a quality musician? Now, I'll give you another example where you go nuts when musicianship isn't right. And it's referred to oftentimes in the audio circles as listening fatigue. Well, you don't have to have an audio system in your home to experience listening fatigue. And I'll give you an example. If you've ever tried using your car radio to listen to music on a long distance trip, it usually only takes an hour or two with most systems, and that's like 99% of them, where you start changing the music you're listening to. If you're listening on the radio, you start wandering around the dial trying to find songs you can stand listening to. And there's nothing wrong with you. What's wrong is, the system itself is essentially desynchronizing the musician. So your brain's trying to lock in on one beat, but there's actually 4 or 5 going on at the same time. The most common one is if you just listen to a singer sing and you try to follow any other instrument in the performance, you can't simply put them together. He's singing words out of time with the guitarist or the drummer or the bass player. It doesn't matter. It's just a mess. So I look for, music being musically played right. And a system has to do that. And if it doesn't do it, it's over. I don't even want to get into tonality because it's irrelevant. Now, the next one I use is I'll talk to people and say, have you ever fooled around with a piano? And people usually chuckle, and eventually they'll say, yeah, I have. And I said, do you play the piano? No. So when you first started playing, you kind of fumbled around a bit. He goes, yeah, I did. But after a while, with that single finger, you're pecking around, and suddenly you begin to put notes together, one note at a time. That makes sense. And that's because in music, there's an absolute, harmonic relationship between note to note. And so, an ordinary person can tell when somebody's played the wrong note. Now, notice I've talked about timing first and then the notes. The reason for it is this simple. If you play the wrong note in time, you're harder to find. If you play the right note out of time, you're spotted dead on. And I've had, the lovely relationship with University of Cincinnati and the, CCM. I had the instructor here for the jazz ensemble, and boy, he jumped on that one right away. Now, so you have to play the right note. Now, when you're listening to a system, you should know where the notes are going intuitively. So simply try to hum along with it. And if you find yourself getting lost and having to change what note you're humming to yourself, there's something wrong with the system, because you should know where it's going. I would say 95% of the people I've dealt with over 40 years can do that very easily. There are some people who can't, but trust me, most people know how to tap their foot in time or pick up the rhythm, and most people know how to hum and pick up the notes and hum along. This is not rocket science. The third element that I look for then, after these two are completely fulfilled, now mind you, 90% of the systems will fail the rhythm test. Then we get into the right notes. About 5% of the remaining 5 to 10% will fail that. But now we get into the third one, which is called emotion. Now, a singer has 3 very unique talents. They have the ability to sing a word, and it is a talent, and it's unique to them. Then, while they're singing the words, they can add the proper emotional inflections onto the words. So if it's a happy song, they sound happy. If it's sad, it sounds sad. The whole range of human experience. And they can do this notwithstanding how they personally feel. There are some recordings out there. Eric Clapton did one singing about the death of his child. How he managed to do that and do a recording is really absolutely astounding, and is an incredible positive mark on his ability as a musician, and a talented one at that, to carry off that song. So if you're listening to one system versus another, and in one system the words sound more spoken than sung, or it sounds like the singer is just doing time, and thankfully I can get out of the recording studio and get back to what I really wanted to do, there's something really wrong with the system. Now, I make the emotion characteristic third. A lot of audiophiles will go running after emotion first, and that's what I call kind of like the Disney factor, where they take someone who's not particularly talented in singing. They made a lot of movies with not necessarily talented singers, but they had tremendous backup and tremendous musical score to it, and it carried the singer through. And you may have heard some live performances where the band is great and the singer is kind of like, okay, but it was a good, enjoyable evening. But if you hear a great singer with a terrible band, it's just painful, because you can almost sense in the singer's voice that, oh, I can't wait for the evening to be over and I get paid, because I really can't deal with this much longer. And that's the truth. So when I talk about musicality, I look at what's happening to the musical structure. Is it being held properly together? Then I go to the pitches and what's going on. And then I go to the emotion. Now, I also have to add, and that's somewhat from the Lynn school of things, and I think it's very true. But there are some other characteristics you have to watch out for too. You are talking about stereo. So the fiction of creating a sound field between the speakers is something that should be accomplished. And Dave Nauber, at that time he was with Madrigal representing Mark Levinson, saying, look, we want to have everything musically right, but guess what? It's stereo. This should be happening too. And he's absolutely correct. So this to me explains a little bit of why people initially had problems going from mono systems to stereo, because the initial stereo recordings, which is done essentially a decorrelation between the right and left signal, failed miserably in maintaining the music, although it was trying to create a spatial atmosphere. That's speculation on my part, but I think there's some truth to it. So, I don't want you to become an audiophile. I want you to buy a system where you really get to enjoy the music. And hopefully my explanation here will give you some tools to go out there and listen to things. Because I'll be honest, I took Debbie to some shows with, really, really expensive gear. And she would come out of the room and, her expression was, why would anybody buy that? I can already get that at Walmart. And she was absolutely correct. So there are a lot of people who unfortunately buy systems or combinations thereof where it's hobbled together from reviews or God knows what. Let's put all the Class A1s together and we're going to have a great system. Well, not exactly. And so it winds up failing and just simply the musical qualifications. And it explains, when you're looking at people who are constantly changing their system, they're trying to get correct the non-verifiables, and really what's happened is the hobby isn't listening to music. The hobby is buying and selling equipment, and I trust me, you won't make any money doing that, and I don't encourage it. Make a very intelligent, good choice the first time. Go home, buy music, and enjoy life. And that's simple.